The abandoned fat mail-order bride sat alone on a wooden crate at Copper Creek Station, her wedding dress stained with dust and betrayal. Cordelia Brightwater clutched a crumpled letter against her chest. The words still burned fresh in her memory. "Too heavy for my taste. Find your own way home." The sun pressed down merciless. Sweat beaded beneath her corset. Her carpetbag sat beside her like a faithful dog, holding everything she owned in this world. The station master emerged from his office, hat in hand. His eyes wouldn't meet hers. "Ma'am, I hate to say it, but there ain't no hotel in town that takes unaccompanied ladies." Cordelia's throat tightened. She had traveled 2,000 miles from Philadelphia, spent her life savings on train fare and wedding preparations. All for a man who took one look and rode away like she carried plague. "When does the next eastbound train arrive?" "2 weeks, ma'am. Maybe 3 if the weather turns." The words hit her chest like stones. 2 weeks in a town that wouldn't shelter her. She stared at the empty platform where Bartholomew Hutchins had stood just an hour ago. His face had twisted with disgust before he mounted his horse. Dust swirled in the distance. A rider approached at steady pace. Cordelia tightened her grip on the carpetbag. Strange men meant danger for women alone. The horse drew closer. Its rider sat tall in the saddle, dark hair catching sunlight. Cherokee features mixed with something else. His clothes were worn but clean, a working man's clothes. He reined up near the platform. His eyes found Cordelia first, then swept the station. "You seen Bartholomew Hutchins?" Cordelia's heart jumped. She studied the stranger's face. Hard lines marked it. Purpose burned in his dark eyes. "He was here, left an hour ago." The rider dismounted. His boots hit the platform with authority. The station master stepped back. "Which direction?" Cordelia pointed northeast. The rider's jaw tightened. He turned toward his horse, then stopped. Something in her posture must have caught his attention. "You waiting for someone?" "I was." Her voice came out smaller than intended. "He's not coming back." The stranger's eyes narrowed. He looked at her torn dress, her dusty bag, the letter, still crumpled in her fist. "You're his mail-order bride." Not a question. A statement heavy with understanding. Cordelia nodded. "Name's Zeke Thornfield." He touched the brim of his hat. "That man owes me money. He owes many people, I suspect." Zeke stepped closer. His presence felt solid, dependable, unlike Hutchins, who had seemed to shimmer with false promises. "What kind of money?" Cordelia asked. "The kind that matters." Zeke's voice carried weight. "Old pain. He cheated my father out of our ranch in a rigged poker game. Plans to sell it to mining interests." Cordelia's stomach dropped. The prosperous rancher from the letters was a fraud. Everything had been lies. "The letters," she whispered. 8 months of correspondence. He wrote about his cattle, his land, his life. Stolen stories, stolen land. Zeke studied her face. "You have those letters?" She nodded. "They might tell me where he's headed next." The station master cleared his throat. "Ma'am, you really need to figure out arrangements. Sun's getting low." Cordelia looked around the dusty platform. No hotel would take her, no money for passage home, no friends in this wilderness. "I could read you the letters," she said to Zeke, "in exchange for safe passage to the next town." Zeke considered this. His horse stamped impatiently. "You can ride? I can learn. This isn't a pleasure trip. Hutchins is dangerous when cornered." Cordelia thought of her empty pockets, the approaching night, the 2-week wait for a train that might not come. More dangerous than being stranded here? Zeke's mouth almost smiled. "Almost. Fair point." He looked at the station master. "Sheriff in town?" "Yes, sir. But he's particular about who he helps." Something passed between the men. Understanding, warning. "We'll try him first," Zeke said to Cordelia. "Legal way before any other way." They walked toward town, Zeke leading his horse. Cordelia's heels clicked against the wooden planks. Her dress rustled with each step. She felt exposed, obvious. "Why are you helping me? You have information I need." "That's all." Zeke glanced at her. His eyes held depths she couldn't read. Nobody should be left sitting on a crate like that. The sheriff's office squatted between a saloon and a general store. Zeke tied his horse to the hitching post. They entered together. Sheriff Mosley looked up from his desk. His eyes dismissed Cordelia immediately, then fixed on Zeke with suspicion. "What can I do for you folks?" Cordelia stepped forward. "I'd like to report a fraud. Bartholomew Hutchins took money for marriage arrangements, then abandoned me at the station." The sheriff leaned back. "Sounds like a civil matter, ma'am. Man's got a right to change his mind." "He took my travel expenses, my dowry payment." "You got papers proving that?" Cordelia's cheeks burned. Ladies didn't discuss such arrangements with documents. "I have his letters promising marriage in exchange for passage west." "Letters ain't contracts." The sheriff's tone grew dismissive. "Maybe you should head back where you came from." Zeke stepped beside Cordelia. "What about theft? He's been running the same scheme on multiple women." "You got proof of that, Cherokee?" The word carried venom. Zeke's hands tightened at his sides. "I'll get proof." "You do that. Somewhere else." The sheriff stood. "This town don't need troublemakers stirring up honest businessmen." Outside, Cordelia's hands shook with rage. "Honest businessman? Hutchins has friends here." Zeke untied his horse. "We're on our own." The sun touched the horizon. Orange light painted the dusty street. Cordelia looked back at the train station, the empty platform, the crate where her dreams had died. "Where do we start?" Zeke mounted his horse, then extended his hand down to her. "With those letters, every detail matters now." Cordelia grasped his hand. His fingers were calloused, strong. He pulled her up behind him. She settled onto the horse's back, her dress bunching awkwardly. "Hold tight," Zeke said. "Trail gets rough from here." They rode toward the setting sun. Behind them, Copper Creek Station faded into shadows. Ahead lay the vast territory where Bartholomew Hutchins thought he could hide. Cordelia wrapped her arms around Zeke's waist. She felt his steady breathing, his determined posture. For the first time since stepping off that train, she wasn't alone. The horse's hooves beat rhythm against the hardpan earth. Each step carried them further from her shattered dreams and closer to something she couldn't yet name. The boarding house in Millfield Creek stood weathered against the evening sky. Mrs. Patterson emerged from behind her counter, eyes sharp as broken glass. Her gaze swept from Zeke's Cherokee features to Cordelia's rumpled wedding dress. "We got one room left. For married folks only." Cordelia's cheeks burned. Zeke's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "My wife and I need separate beds. Got a double and a cot. Take it or leave it." They took it. The room smelled of old wood and loneliness. Cordelia sat on the cot while Zeke claimed the chair by the window. Her letters lay spread across the small table between them. 8 months of careful correspondence. 8 months of lies. Zeke read each letter twice. His fingers traced the words with surprising gentleness. Cordelia watched his face change as he absorbed details. Hutchins had written about cattle drives that never happened. Described land that belonged to other men. Painted pictures of prosperity built on deception. "He mentions the Riverside Bank in 3 letters, Zeke said. "Different amounts each time. He was establishing credibility, making me believe he had resources, or tracking his actual deposits from other marks." The word stung. Marks. That's what she was, what they all were. Zeke folded the letters carefully. "We visit that bank tomorrow. See what records they'll share." Cordelia pulled her shawl tighter. "Why would they tell us anything?" "Because you're his intended wife. Asking about joint accounts." Heat crept up her neck. The lie felt heavy, necessary. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Cordelia lay on the narrow cot, listening to Zeke's steady breathing. He hadn't touched the bed. Slept upright in the chair with his hand near his gun. Morning brought coffee black as creek mud. Mrs. Patterson served it with suspicion and day-old biscuits. Cordelia had torn her wedding dress to make riding clothes. The white fabric now hung in practical pieces. A skirt that wouldn't tangle in stirrups. Sleeves that allowed movement. Zeke taught her to mount his horse properly. His hands guided her foot to the stirrup. Showed her where to grip the saddle. His touch was brief, professional, but it burned through her gloves. Sit deep. Move with the horse, not against it. She tried, failed, tried again. The ground looked far away. I'll ride behind you until you're steady. His arms came around her to reach the reins. She felt his chest against her back, his breath near her ear. The horse moved beneath them, and she understood the rhythm. The dance between rider and mount. At Riverside Bank, Mr. Clemens reviewed their request with banker's caution. Cordelia wore her most respectable expression. Spoke of marriage settlements and joint financial planning. Mr. Hutchins has been quite active, Clemens admitted. Multiple deposits over the past 6 months. How much activity? Zeke asked. I couldn't say exactly. Privacy concerns, you understand. Cordelia leaned forward. As his intended wife, surely I have some claim to information. Clemens consulted his ledger. His finger traced columns of figures. He's deposited funds from various sources, always in cash. Always requesting immediate transfers to other institutions. Which institutions? Denver, Santa Fe, San Francisco. Zeke's eyes sharpened. How much total? Several $1,000s. More than a working rancher typically handles. Outside the bank, they walked in silence. The numbers painted a clear picture. Hutchins wasn't just a failed suitor. He was a career criminal. How many women? Cordelia asked. At least a dozen. Maybe more. The weight of it settled in her chest. 12 women who had traveled west with hope. 12 women who had sat on their own crates, abandoned and ashamed. They rode to the edge of town where the cemetery held weathered headstones. Zeke dismounted near a small plot marked with Cherokee symbols. He knelt beside a simple grave. My father, he said without looking up, buried him 6 months ago. Cordelia slid down from the saddle. The ground felt solid beneath her feet. She stood behind Zeke, watching his shoulders carry old grief. He believed Hutchins was honest. Played poker with him for months before the big game. Wind moved through the prairie grass. Whispered secrets to the stones. The ranch was everything. 3 generations of my family worked that land. We'll get it back. Zeke's hand touched the earth above his father's grave. Legal system don't favor men with Cherokee blood. Then we use other systems. He looked up at her. Something shifted in his dark eyes. Recognition, maybe, or respect. They made camp that night beside a creek that ran silver in the moonlight. Zeke built a small fire while Cordelia arranged their supplies. She had learned to hobble the horse, to check the horizon for weather signs, to read the evening sky. You're different than I expected, Zeke said across the flames. What did you expect? Someone who would give up easier. Cordelia poked the fire with a stick. Sparks rose toward the stars. I gave up once, when I got on that train to marry a stranger. Thought I needed a man to make my life worthwhile. And now? Now I know better. The fire crackled between them. Zeke's face was half shadow, half light. Cordelia felt something growing in the space between their separate bedrolls. Not romance, exactly. Partnership. Understanding born from shared purpose. Morning brought news that changed everything. A rider from the Territorial Marshal's office stopped at their camp. His badge caught early sunlight as he dismounted. You folks seen Bartholomew Hutchins? We're looking for him. Ourselves, Zeke said carefully. Federal charges pending. Mail fraud. Interstate transportation of stolen goods. Cordelia's heart jumped. How many victims? 16 women so far. Probably more. The marshal accepted coffee and sat on a log near their fire. His weathered face carried the weight of bad news delivered too often. There's something else. He's not working alone. Zeke's hand moved toward his gun. How many others? Don't know yet. But money's moving through banks in 5 territories. This is bigger than one man with a deck of cards. After the marshal rode away, Cordelia and Zeke sat in heavy silence. 16 women. A criminal network. Federal involvement that could help or complicate everything. Changes the game, Zeke said finally. Makes it more dangerous. Makes it more important. They broke camp with new urgency. The trail led northwest toward Denver, where Hutchins had transferred the largest sums. Cordelia rode behind Zeke, her arms around his waist, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. The landscape opened before them. Endless sky, endless grass. Endless possibility. They were no longer just an abandoned bride and a dispossessed rancher. They were hunters now. Partners in pursuit of justice. Miles passed beneath the horses' hooves. Cordelia learned to read the land the way Zeke read tracks. To see water in the distance, weather in the clouds, safety in the fold of hills. At midday, they stopped to rest the horse. Zeke checked their supplies while Cordelia studied Hutchins' letters again. New details emerged in light of what they now knew. He mentions a business partner in 3 letters. Someone named Morrison. Zeke looked up from the water barrel. That name means something to you? He wrote about consulting Morrison on cattle prices. But there were no cattle, so Morrison knows about the fraud. Morrison might be running the whole operation. The wind picked up, scattering dust across the prairie. Cordelia felt the vastness of what they faced. Not just one man, but a web of criminals stretching across territories. We're riding into something bigger than revenge, she said. We're riding toward the truth. Zeke mounted the horse and extended his hand. That's worth the risk. Cordelia grasped his fingers and swung up behind him. The horse stepped forward, carrying them deeper into unknown country. Behind them, their old lives faded into distance. Ahead, the trail wound toward Denver and answers that might destroy them both. But for the first time since stepping off that train, Cordelia felt truly alive, not waiting to be chosen or rescued or validated. Moving forward under her own power, toward her own purpose, with a partner who saw her strength instead of her limitations. The sun climbed higher, the trail stretched ahead. And somewhere in the distance, Bartholomew Hutchins believed himself, safe from the abandoned bride and the dispossessed rancher who had learned to trust each other. The stagecoach to Denver rolled through mountain passes where shadows gathered early. Cordelia sat beside a traveling preacher who smelled of tobacco and false piety. Zeke rode up top with the driver, scanning the horizon for trouble. They had. Learned Hutchins was moving toward the territorial capital. Banking records showed large transfers scheduled for the end of the week. Time was running short. The preacher made conversation about the moral decay of frontier towns. Cordelia nodded politely while counting the miles. Her carpetbag held copies of all the evidence they had gathered, bank records, correspondence, names of other victims. Traveling alone is dangerous for a lady, the preacher said. I'm not alone. That half-breed up top, he's not proper protection. Cordelia's jaw tightened. She looked out the window at the passing landscape. Pine trees clung to rocky slopes. The air grew thinner as they climbed. He's more than proper. He's honorable. The preacher sniffed his disapproval. Cordelia turned away from him. Through the dusty glass, she watched Zeke's steady profile against the sky. Something felt wrong about this journey. Too easy. Too direct. Hutchins was clever enough to avoid main roads and scheduled transportation. Yet his trail led straight toward the most obvious destination. The first shot came from a cluster of boulders beside the road. The driver shouted and hauled on the reins. Horses screamed and reared. The coach lurched sideways, throwing passengers against the walls. More shots followed. Not aimed to kill, but to stop. Robbery, the preacher whimpered. But Cordelia knew better. This was too organized, too precise. The coach ground to a halt in a cloud of dust. Through the window, she saw masked riders emerging from cover. 6 men with their faces hidden. Professional in their movements. The door yanked open. Rough hands pulled her out. "Where's the Cherokee?" She looked toward the driver's seat. Empty. Zeke had vanished during the chaos. "Don't know what you mean." A hard slap across her face. Stars exploded behind her eyes. "Bartholomew Hutchins sends his regards." They bound her hands with practiced efficiency. Threw her across a saddle. The preacher whimpered pleas for mercy, but they ignored him. They had come for specific cargo. The abandoned mining camp squatted in a narrow canyon like a broken tooth. Wooden buildings sagged against the mountainside. Equipment rusted where it had been dropped. The earth was scarred from digging, from hope that had turned to disappointment. They locked Cordelia in what had been the foreman's office. Small windows, thick walls. A door that didn't yield to her strength. Outside, she heard the men talking in low voices. Hutchins would arrive tomorrow. The fake marriage ceremony was already arranged. A corrupt preacher would make it legal enough for the paperwork Hutchins needed. Her stomach turned. Not just marriage, but complicity. He would use her to legitimize claims on properties throughout the territory. Night fell hard in the mountains. Cold seeped through the walls. Cordelia wrapped herself in her shawl and tried to think. The men had taken her carpet bag, but they hadn't searched her thoroughly. The small notebook she kept hidden in her corset held the most damaging evidence. She worked by moonlight to tear out pages, hid them in cracks between floorboards. If Zeke found this place, he would know where to look. If Zeke was still alive. The thought hit her chest harder than the slap. She had grown to depend on his steady presence, his quiet strength, the way he saw her as capable instead of burdensome. Somewhere in the darkness, a night bird called, then another. The sound was wrong for this elevation, too rhythmic, too purposeful. Cherokee signals. Her grandfather had taught Zeke the old ways. Hope fluttered in her chest. She moved to the window and listened. The calls came from different directions. Zeke wasn't alone. Dawn brought Bartholomew Hutchins riding up the canyon with the confidence of a man who believed he had won. He looked exactly as his letters had described, handsome in a shallow way, well-dressed, eyes that held no depth. He entered her prison with a bouquet of wilted flowers. "My dear Cordelia, so sorry for the confusion." She stayed silent. "This is all a misunderstanding. We'll be married properly, and you'll have everything I promised." "Including the lies?" His smile never wavered. "Including security, respectability, a place in proper society. Built on fraud. Built on opportunity. The territory is changing. Smart people position themselves advantageously." He set the flowers on the table. The gesture was meant to seem romantic. Instead, it felt like mockery. "The ceremony begins at noon. I suggest you prepare yourself." After he left, Cordelia examined the wilted bouquet. Hidden among the stems was a small piece of paper, not from Hutchins. The handwriting was different. "Stay strong. Justice comes at sunset." No signature. But she recognized the careful script from bank documents. Someone inside Hutchins' organization was working against him. The corrupt preacher arrived with the noon sun. Brother Malikai wore black robes that had seen too many questionable ceremonies. His Bible was well thumbed, but his eyes held no faith. "Dearly beloved," he began without conviction. Cordelia stood rigid beside Hutchins. The words washed over her like poison. She thought of Zeke somewhere in the rocks above them, of the evidence hidden in the floorboards, of 16 other women who deserved justice. Do you, Bartholomew, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. And do you, Cordelia, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband in the sight of God and these witnesses? She opened her mouth to refuse, to damn the consequences. A rifle shot echoed through the canyon, then another. The men guarding the ceremony scrambled for their weapons. Hutchins grabbed Cordelia's arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Insurance," he hissed. More shots came from the rocks above. Not random firing, but precise placement, pinning down the guards without killing them. "Federal Marshal," a voice called from the canyon rim, "surrender your weapons." Hutchins' face went white. He had prepared for many contingencies, but not for federal intervention. "They can't prove anything," he whispered to himself. But Cordelia knew they could. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, victim testimony, the paper trail that stretched across 5 territories. Brother Malachi had dropped his Bible and was running toward the horses. The guards were trapped between the canyon walls and the rifles above. Surrender was their only option. "Let her go, Hutchins." Zeke's voice carried clearly through the mountain air. "It's over." Hutchins' grip tightened on Cordelia's arm. His other hand moved to the gun at his hip. "I've got nothing to lose now. You've got your life to lose. That's something." Cordelia felt Hutchins' desperation and the tremor of his fingers. Cornered men made dangerous choices. But she had learned things during her time in the wilderness. Patience, timing, the moment when balance shifted. She went completely limp. Hutchins stumbled, his grip loosening as he tried to support her sudden weight. In that instant, she rolled away from him and toward the cover of the nearest building. The federal marshals moved down the canyon walls with the precision of experienced lawmen. Hutchins found himself surrounded, his men disarmed, his escape routes blocked. "Bartholomew Hutchins, you're under arrest for mail fraud, conspiracy, and interstate transportation of stolen goods." The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. The sound echoed off the canyon walls with the finality of justice delivered. Zeke emerged from the rocks, his rifle held loose in his hands. He moved toward Cordelia with careful steps, as if she might disappear if he approached too quickly. "You hurt?" She shook her head. Her throat was too tight for words. "The evidence you hid, we found it." Marshal Davidson stepped forward with a leather folder thick with documents. Bank records, correspondence, victim statements. The case against Hutchins was overwhelming. 16 women so far, Davidson said. Maybe more as word spreads. Cordelia looked at the handcuffed man who had promised her love and delivered betrayal. He seemed smaller now, less significant. A petty criminal who had caused enormous pain. What happens to his properties? Seized by the federal government. Victims will receive compensation, including the ranch. Davidson consulted his papers. The Thornfield family ranch is listed among the fraudulent transfers. It'll be returned to its rightful owner. Zeke's face remained carefully neutral, but Cordelia saw the relief in his eyes. His father's land would be restored. The sacred ground would be protected. "We'll need both of you to testify at the trial," Davidson continued. They rode down from the mining camp as the sun touched the western peaks. Hutchins and his men were secured in a prison wagon. The corrupt preacher had been caught trying to steal a horse. Justice had been served, but Cordelia felt empty. The adventure was ending. Soon they would return to their separate lives. She would go back east. Zeke would rebuild his ranch. The thought of separation hurt worse than Hutchins' abandonment ever had. The Denver courthouse stood against autumn sky, its brick walls holding the weight of territorial justice. Cordelia sat in the witness box, her voice steady as she recounted 8 months of correspondence. The jury listened with faces carved from stone. Bartholomew Hutchins wore shackles that caught the light from tall windows. His lawyer, Argued desperation, not malice. Claimed his client was driven to fraud by circumstances beyond his control. 16 women, the prosecutor countered. 16 lives disrupted. 16 dreams shattered for profit. Zeke testified about the poker game that stole his father's ranch. His words were measured, factual. No emotion showed in his voice, but his hands gripped the rail until his knuckles went white. The verdict came after 2 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Hutchins received 15 years in territorial prison. His assets were seized for victim compensation. The Thornfield Ranch was restored to its rightful owner. Outside the courthouse, other women waited. Sarah from Kansas, Margaret from Ohio, Emily from Tennessee. All mail-order brides who had traveled west to find love and discovered betrayal instead. They formed a circle on the courthouse steps. Shared stories of abandonment, humiliation, survival. Their voices created a choir of resilience that echoed off the building's facade. "What now?" Sarah asked. Cordelia looked at each face. Strong. Women who had rebuilt their lives from ashes. "Now we make sure this never happens again." Marshal Davidson approached with legal papers, thick as winter blankets. The compensation process would take months to complete. Each victim would receive a portion of Hutchins' seized assets. "Enough for a fresh start," he said. "Or to start something new," Cordelia replied. The train east departed at dawn. Cordelia stood on the platform with her carpetbag, watching steam rise from the locomotive. Her ticket to Philadelphia was tucked safely in her reticule. Zeke waited beside her, hat in his hands. The silence between them held more weight than words. "Your ranch needs rebuilding," she said finally. "It does. That's important work. It is." The train whistle blew. Passengers began boarding. Cordelia picked up her bag, then set it down again. "I have a proposition." Zeke's eyes found hers. "The territory needs legal services for women. Contracts, property rights, protection from fraud. You thinking of staying?" "I'm thinking of building something that matters." The train whistle blew again. The conductor called for final boarding. "What about Philadelphia?" "Philadelphia has plenty of lawyers." "The frontier needs advocates." Zeke studied her face. Saw determination where others might see foolishness. "The ranch has good water, room for building, room for an office, room for whatever you need." Cordelia let her train ticket flutter to the platform. The eastern wind carried it away toward tracks that led to a life she no longer wanted. 3 months later, snow covered the rebuilt Thornfield Ranch. Zeke had raised new buildings with the help of neighboring Cherokee families. The main house stood solid against winter winds. Beside it, a smaller structure held Cordelia's law practice. Her first client was a widow fighting to keep her homestead. Her second was a woman whose husband had disappeared, leaving debts and questions. Word spread through the territory that Cordelia Brightwater provided legal help for women who had nowhere else to turn. She kept her maiden name, not from rejection of marriage, but from acceptance of herself. The woman who had sat abandoned on a crate no longer existed. In her place stood someone who had learned to depend on her own strength. Zeke found her at her desk on a January evening, reviewing contracts by lamplight. Snow tapped against the windows. The fire crackled in the stone hearth he had built with his own hands. "Long day? Productive day." She looked up from her papers. "Mrs. Henderson will keep her land. The bank can't foreclose without proper documentation." He set a cup of coffee beside her elbow. Steam rose from the dark surface. "You saved her. Home. We saved her home. Your testimony about property boundaries made the difference." Partnership had become their foundation. Not the desperate alliance of their first meeting, but something deeper. Built on mutual respect, shared purpose, equal contribution. "Marry me," Zeke said. The words fell into the quiet room and settled between them. Cordelia set down her pen, studied his face in the firelight. Why? Because I want to build something permanent with you. Not from need, but from choice. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, snow continued falling. The land stretched endlessly toward horizons that held infinite possibility. I don't want to be rescued. I'm not offering rescue. I'm offering partnership, equal partnership, in everything. She turned from the window, saw him standing by her desk, patient as the mountains, steady as the seasons. Then yes, they married in spring when wildflowers covered the meadows. Sarah, Margaret, and Emily came from their new homes across the territory. Cherokee families brought traditional foods and blessings. Marshall Davidson performed the ceremony with words about justice and love being intertwined. Cordelia wore a dress she had sewn herself. Simple blue fabric that allowed her to move freely. No corset, no bustles, no constraints. The vows they spoke were their own creation. Promises about supporting each other's dreams. About building something larger than themselves. About facing whatever came with unified strength. 6 months after the wedding, a young woman stepped off the train at Copper Creek Station. She carried a carpet bag and a letter of introduction. Another mail-order bride whose intended had disappeared. She sat on a wooden crate, uncertain and afraid. But she wasn't alone. Cordelia arrived within the hour. Her buggy bore a painted sign that read, "Legal Services for Women." She climbed down and approached the abandoned bride with understanding eyes. "My name is Cordelia Thornfield. I help women in situations exactly like yours." The young woman looked up with desperate hope. Is there really help? There's always help. And there's always justice if you're willing to fight for it. They rode together toward the Thornfield Ranch. Behind them, the empty platform held no power to destroy dreams. Ahead, the horizon promised new beginnings built on solid ground. The abandoned mail-order bride had found her purpose, not in marriage or rescue, but in ensuring that no woman would sit alone on a crate without someone coming for her. Someone who understood that true strength came from lifting others up. The frontier was vast, but it was no longer empty of hope. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.